Good morning, everyone. I'm Michael Ulrich, Director of NYU Washington, D.C., and I'm welcoming you to this morning's program, A Conversation with the Secretary General of the Organization of American States, Luis Almagro, co-hosted by NYU Washington, D.C. and NYU's John Brademas Center. Today's conversation will focus on the essential role of the international community in helping to strengthen democracy in the Americas. The discussion will cover the outlook on crucial issues that are directly affecting the hemisphere, such as the state of affairs in Cuba, the political crisis in Venezuela and Nicaragua, among others. We are pleased to welcome the Honorable Luis Almagro, who in his role as Secretary General to the organization aims to ensure more rights for more people and to bring the organization closer to the realities of the hemisphere. Prior to his election, Dr. Almagro served in various diplomatic posts in addition to holding numerous positions in the Uruguayan government. He served as Uruguay's Minister of Foreign Affairs from 2010 to 2015, prior to which he was Uruguay's ambassador to the Republic of China. He also served as an advisor to then Minister Jose Mujica before being appointed Director of the International Affairs Unit of the Ministry of Livestock, Agriculture, and Fisheries in 2005. Joining the Secretary for today's conversation is Geovanny Vicente-Romero, columnist for CNN based in Washington, D.C. He is a political strategist, international consultant, and lecturer. He has published many articles on development, human rights, governance, democracy, elections, the environment, as well as the role of women in society. He is the founder of the Dominican Republic Center of Public Policy, Leadership, and Development. He has a master's degree from the George Washington University in Political Communications and Strategic Governance. I'd now like to welcome Secretary Almagro to the podium for his remarks.
In a way, the story of the Americas has been the result of the struggle between some people carrying, at least occasionally, some high principles, usually of democracy and human rights, and some ethically poor people, dictators, narcos, terrorists, guerrilla, criminal gangsters, corrupt politicians and corrupt businessmen. Self-serving leaders are all small men and women who do not care about democracy, human rights, about alleviating poverty and closing the grand inequality gap of our continent. We can't say that indecent and unethical people have completely prevailed in our continent, but their share of formal and informal power, or their millions, or billions stashed in banks, accounts abroad, no matter the cost. Usually it doesn't matter if the cost means destroying basic human rights and liberties of an entire population, as in the case of the two surviving dictatorships in the continent. No matter if the cost means destroying natural resources and world heritages. No matter if the cost of holding on to power means being permissive with human rights abuses elsewhere, or if the cost of winning an election means being lenient with respect to application of the rules of the democratic game and rule of law. The resilience of indecency in politics is why the Americas is still home to 15 of the 20 most violent cities in the world, why we are still the most unequal region in the planet, why impunity unashamedly lingers, why corruption is deep-rooted in society and institutions, why organized crime easily finds business partners in our countries, why nothing is done to fix extreme poverty and exclusion, but much is done to keep the powerful in the top echelons. The ones who fight for what is right should rally behind the principles and values, human rights and democracy that multiple inter-American conventions, charters, resolutions, and documents mandate, yet few sometimes are in practice. This struggle between the decency and indecency in politics and international affairs has cost us a great deal in the last 2 decades. In the 20th century, the region experienced dictatorships, bureaucratic authoritarianism, civil wars, proxy wars in the context of Cold War, coups, self-coups, guerrilla uprisings, gross human rights violations, and massacres. In the 21st century, we have seen more of the same maladies and another new phenomenon: dictatorships, crimes against humanity, an unprecedented migration crisis in our hemisphere, permissiveness towards dictators, permissiveness towards abuse of power, silence towards gross human rights violations, narcos, narco-dictators usurping power, hybrid regimes, emergence of hate speech elsewhere, coups, criminals, and terrorists operating behind a guerrilla facade, and rampant corruption. The Serpo dictatorship in Venezuela is a prime example of all possible human indecency in one place. I think it has been said many times, and it is now well understood, I hope. The seriousness of the humanitarian crisis and of the suffering of the Venezuelan people. We have produced 4 reports detailing the way the dictatorship has destroyed every element of democracy according to the Inter-American Democratic Charter. The OAS has documented the violation of human rights, of freedom of speech, of freedom of protest. We published a report documenting denounces and evidence of crimes against humanity committed by the Maduro regime since at least February 2014. Since then, the case has been referred to the ICC by other member states. Despite the evidence and recognition that Maduro and his cronies are dictators, usurpers, violators of human rights, criminal corrupt, he remains in Miraflores. We were the first to recognize the legitimacy of President Guaido, whose leadership has given hope and a real possibility for a transition to democracy since January 2019. The democratic international community has supported the interim president. He represents a transition by democracy, peace, and constitutional means. What is quite funny, I must admit, is the confusion of some in the international community to still call Maduro president. Maybe it is intentional. Perhaps there are hidden interests, surely unethical, because whoever supports a dictator has some profound, skewed sense of what is right and fundamental values of human dignity. In addition, the crisis in Venezuela cannot be politicized. The crisis cannot be instrumentalized for electoral purposes in other countries. The international community must continue to put pressure on the Venezuelan dictators in any way that it can and that is consistent with international law. The United States, Panama, Canada, and the European Union have applied sanctions that specifically target the dictators and its millions and billions stockpiled abroad. We need more sanctions, no less. There seems to be confusion or just plain ideological bias when we talk about the need for more sanctions for the Venezuelan dictators. Some people believe that targeted sanctions against criminal and corrupt dictators will starve children, and they like to quote the sanctions of the United States applied to Iraq to justify their argument. They think that applying more sanctions to Venezuela will lead to child starvation. Let's be completely clear. Kids are malnourished and were already starving way before the sanctions were applied to the Venezuelan dictators. Food scarcity and food apartheid is a direct result of deliberate actions by the Maduro regime against its own people, since long before. As the interdisciplinary panel of experts of the OAS documented the evidence of the Crimes Against Humanity report published a year ago. Just to mention 2 indicators, in 2017, Venezuela lost on average 24 pounds, and it is estimated that 280,000 children are now at risk of dying by malnutrition. The worst sanctions against the Venezuelan people are those applied by the Cubans that are taking approximately 1/3 of their oil exports just to be paid about 22,000 people at least that repress and oppress the Venezuelan people. It's a case of a country paying to be oppressed. It's a case of a country paying to be tortured. It's a case of a country paying another country to commit crimes against humanity in Venezuela. And that is the case. That is a horrible case. Some defend that sanctions on PDVSA will worsen the humanitarian situation, as if the profit generated from PDVSA had been used by the dictators to provide their people with social well-being, health services, and other basic needs. Nothing like that has happened in the last 4 years at least. So again, let's be honest. You would have to be a fool to believe that PDVSA profits have been going to the Venezuelan people in the form of basic social services in the Maduro years. If we want to help Venezuela, we must also deal with the Cuban dictatorship directly. At the OES, we're intentionally bringing the cancer that is the Cuban dictatorship to the front of the Inter-American affairs agenda. We want to bring visibility to the abuses of the Cuban regime for over 6 decades, give voice to the victims of gross human rights violations and to the victims of crimes against humanity. For far too long, the Cuban dictatorship has enjoyed international impunity. The OES is working to end this shameless impunity. Cuba is not special, and it should not be an exception to the inter-American values and principles that are applied to all member states. All values and principles applied to all member states, no exceptions. And then there is the 1-year-long political crisis in Nicaragua that has resulted in human rights violations, rapid deterioration of the rule of law, of democracy, and its institutions. The HIA report, published last year, even points to possible crimes of humanity committed during the protests in the spring and early summer of 2018. We will stand by the victims and their families, by human rights and democratic principles in Nicaragua and anywhere else in the hemisphere. This is why I decided to invoke Article 20 of the Inter-American Democratic Charter in January as a way to foster the restoration of democracy, peace, and justice in the Central American nation. And this is why we consider a condition for anything, the liberation of all political prisoners. The discussion in Nicaragua can still be conducted in political terms and logics, contrary to the Venezuelan case where the usurper dictators are mafia that operated in criminal terms logic. If we can draw a conclusion from the events that have taken place in Nicaragua in the last 12 months, is that we cannot take political stability and economic growth for granted, especially if the foundation is shaky, non-democratic, and not abiding to a strong rule of law, but abiding to a political logic of interest. Those who favor decency in inter-American affairs must really understand that the ethically poor people have a clear plan to stabilize democracy and destroy human rights, to eliminate all kinds of guarantees all about the continent. Thus, we cannot allow Venezuela to become Cuba. We cannot allow Nicaragua to become Venezuela. And we can't allow others to become Nicaragua. I believe basic decency is not lost yet, at least not entirely. Going forward, we hope that the story of the Americas will be determined by the actions of principled individuals, not by the ethically poor. The OES is already our moral rudder. We can rely on it. You can rely on it to have the appropriate responses to injustice, to recognize and fight for human dignity, to counter the abuses of power. Thank you.
Secretary General Almagro, thank you very much for the wonderful remarks. We really are honored to have you with us here on this occasion, on this morning in DC. So, good morning, everyone. How is everyone doing on this beautiful morning in Washington, DC? Thank you very much for joining us, and thank you also to the Brademas Center for organizing this such an important discussion today. So we are very honored to have you here. Thank you for being here, and thank you for your time. So what we are gonna do is, we are going to move on to a conversation, questions and answers, And then we will have some questions from the audience. So please, when we get to that point, feel free to ask questions, as many as you need. Okay? Thank you very much. Let's just start off with some general questions before getting into some specifics, some specific countries you already mentioned during your speech. So what social, economic, and political trends do you see right now in Latin America that the Organization of American States is working to reinforce or prevent?
In fact, sorry. Sorry. This is a very good morning. It's a very good morning, except that it's a very allergic morning. So, what I see are the same structural problems that we have faced in the past 200 years. If we see the structure of poverty has changed very little in Latin America and Caribbean countries during these years. Inequality has changed very little, and that are the biggest complications that we have for development and democracy. We have also the same kind of problems about access to rights and, of course, equity. We have the same kind of troubles and difficulties in order to make our political system work in a way that is coherent with democratic principles. And there is still a logic in the continent, everywhere in the continent practically, that the winner take it all. I mean, there is this equation of that 50% plus one vote equals 100%, and 50% minus one vote equals 0. And that is, it makes it very difficult for the political systems to operate in a in a way that that can be efficient in order to resolve the problems of the people. We see the same structural problems of violence, of drug trafficking. So, and we see our countries struggling in order to try to keep our democratic systems alive and operative. Doesn't mean that we should have a pessimist approach. We need to, what is the approach of the organization is to facilitate conditions in order to achieve solutions. If we see inequality is not only based on poor distribution, but in the lack of access to rights. And that is the biggest challenge that we have ahead. So to bring rights to the people, to make evident that the rights should be delivered to the people, that has been the biggest challenge, and we keep it doing that way. More rights for more people is the slogan of the organization. Well, we try to make that operative. So sometimes mistakes are made on the right side of the political spectrum. Sometimes are made on the left side. So that's what it means. We cannot be ideological. And any time that we have applied a formula, somehow it has not worked. We need to address the concerns and the problems of the people and to be aware. And these days we have a better partnership that is civil society. Responsibility has increased dramatically. The citizens today play a much more relevant role in the continent, and there are denounces about human rights violations, corrupt cases, environmental disasters. Now they are playing, definitely citizens are playing a role about that. Our governments and our political systems, some of them, they are trying to get into the 21st century. Some of them, they keep carrying the same problems of efficiency that they had in the 20th century.
Thank you very much for your comments on this question. And I'm pretty sure that the main challenge of the OAS right now is to bring more rights for more people, right? So I just want to ask you another question, and just keeping in mind that Latin America is a very vibrant, democratic region that is holding elections, several elections for president each year. And I just want to know what is the direction that Latin America is moving towards, generally speaking, maybe right, left, center-right, center-left?
You see, some countries move to the right, some countries move to the left, and some countries stay where they are. And I think that we shouldn't read the political situation in the continent in that way. It would be a serious mistake. I mean, you can have a leftist government that can be extremely efficient, that would bring unemployment to the lowest ever, that would attract foreign investment, breaking records year after year, breaking records of export year after year, like was the government of José Mujica in Uruguay. And then you may have some leftist government that have completely failed. Like the Venezuelan case is rampant. And on the other side, you have the same, right? Governments that have failed and their response to the economy problems have not been the best one. And some countries that definitely they have worked in a different way. That means that more than to choose right or left, people should choose efficiency and those that they can provide solutions to the people, and that they are more connected to the needs of the people. And I would highly recommend always to put the ideology a little bit lower in the priorities when you vote.
Thank you very much. And I just want to know, how are the global forces of protectionism and populism affecting the Americas right now?
Well, in this continent, we invented populism. I mean, and we have enjoyed the pathetic results of populism during these 200 years of independent life that more or less we have had. So it is not that we should be scared now about populism, because we have been dealing with that in practically every country of the continent. We have had cases of populist and protectionism and all this. I mean, I remember just some years ago, of course, where we have some masters of the protectionism in the continent, and that was it. And it doesn't mean sometimes that the economy may work well, and sometimes the economy may work not so positive. It depends, of course, your conditions. It depends how you connect and interact with the world. I mean, and this is not. Maybe I put it in a simpler way than it is, but you have to see what is convenient, and each country has to see what is convenient and what it works for their economy. Because the main Secretary General of the Organization of American States, my main concern is that every government keeps its house in order. And that is the biggest contribution that they can make, anybody. If they keep the house in order, that makes the rest of the things much, much easier. The problem is when they cannot keep their house in order. The Venezuelan case, again, is pathetically extreme example of that. But that is how we need to address these issues. I mean, and it's different for every country. For example, a country like Uruguay. I always put the example of Uruguay because it's, of course, the country I know the best. we produce food for 60 million people, maybe 70 million people. And we are 3.3 million. I mean, there's no way that we can eat all that. And if we, so we need foreign markets. We need the possibility to access to any market in the world. That is an extreme need for the country. And at the same time, it doesn't have any sense that we produce some things that we definitely don't have a scale and technological conditions to produce them, and it would be too expensive to be produced in Uruguay. So we need also to access to these goods anywhere that is possible in the world. And so I think if you can manage foreign trade in a clever way, then it can provide the best possible results for your country. It's always like that. So you don't have to close the possibility for foreign trade, never, I think. But of course, you have also to be aware of the social, and economic, and productive conditions of your country. I mean, it doesn't mean that you have to be so unaware that you completely destroyed your productive and economic system. Again, Venezuela is a extreme case about that.
Thank you very much for your remarks. I think that after seeing so many political scandals in Latin America, especially we just saw the passing of former Peruvian President Alan Garcia, I need to ask this. How are efforts to improve transparency and reduce corruption in the Americas taking shape right now?
I think it started some years ago, and somehow it's working. It is much better today than it was 5 or 10 years ago. 5, 10 years ago, we pretended that everything was fine when it wasn't. The corruption of PDVSA and Odebrecht were rampant in the continent, and everybody was just pretending that nothing was going on. Today, if we see just the amount of politicians that have been prosecuted or condemned, the cases that are being investigated or have been investigated, of course, we are in a much better shape in order to clean our political systems. I think we have passed from something that we could call the certainty for impunity to something that is the possibility for justice. Maybe we don't have everywhere the certainty of justice that we should need, but we are approaching there. And you refer to a specific case of the suicide of President Alan Garcia. That is a case that we will never know because, of course, and that is a pity in many ways. So and always, of course, the good memories that we have about his political skills and all this. Okay, somehow he was able to preserve part of that. No?
It seems like corruption remains as one of the main challenges, political challenges for the Latin American region, especially with cases such as Odebrecht, no? And we just saw what happened in Peru. So, but now let's move on to specific countries that you already mentioned during your speech. And let's talk Venezuela, because that's a critical issue we are facing as a region right now, and we need to come closer as a region, as a community, as international community, right? So I think we have so many concerns and hopes for Venezuela, and what can be expected in the near future, and what is most needed to better support the Guaidó movement and the brave and strong people of Venezuela.
What we can expect is means a lot of futurology and weather forecast without having any instruments, and that is very, very difficult to do. I don't feel like making a forecast about that. I'm more concerned about what we should do and about what we should implement the way for solutions in Venezuela. And the best possible way ahead is to support the transitional government of Juan Guaidó, because it is like the last hope that we have for a pacific solution for the country, or to bring peace back to the country. I think the most violent solution that can be applied to the country is the one that is applied now. That is the violent solution. So my concerns to some empty slogans like hands off Venezuela, when you have the whole violence of the world applied to the Venezuelan people, affecting millions of people. Millions of people have to abandon the country because they were starving and they didn't have medical care at all. Millions of people are starving. Thousands have died because of different conditions in hospitals in Venezuela. New diseases that were eradicated for decades, they are back in Venezuela. Torture, political prisoners, extrajudicial killings, murders of whatever kind, the micromanagement of repression. No? For example, there are this kind of repression that you live in neighborhoods, communities, in your street, that practically nobody talks about, but they see in your, and this is very Cuban in the concept, no? They see that you are a sort of social activist, or that you are protesting against the government, and very likely you will have some collective member of the colectivos come and put a gun on your head, and once or twice till you leave the country. So this kind of political cleansing of the country is this political apartheid of the country is something awful. You don't have the carnet de la patria, you don't have a medical treatment, you have cancer, you need dialysis or whatever, and you just not allowed. So, and it's the best way to push people away. I mean, it's even more efficient than making people starve. So that is a violent solution that the country is suffering. We have this possibility. We need to support it. We make it strong. You see that the Venezuelan people somehow recovered faith and hope when this transitional government started. And you could see just in the migration numbers, no? There were like 5,000 a day Venezuelans leaving the country in the past 6 months till January. January and February, that declined to 2,000. And then, March started already growing, and April is back to 5,000 practically. So we need to support this transitional government to make it as strong as possible, to bring the most international support that we can bring to them, and to help the transitional government to gain political space, to gain institutionality, to gain the possibility to give answers to the problems of the people. And that is, and I think that is an imperative for all of us. The decision to let some narco dictators stay in power is outrageous. Shouldn't be allowed. Shouldn't be even considered. And in the mid-term, long-term, definitely we need to think about some instrument of international public law, like responsibility to protect humanitarian intervention to deal with the Venezuelan case. But we just cannot leave it like it is. No matter how bad the name of these two tools have in the international community because of how wrongly were applied before, but the thing is that if they need to be applied in the right way, we shouldn't doubt about.
Thank you very much for your remarks. I think we all agree on the fact that we as the international community should let the people of Venezuela know that they are not alone. We stand with them 100%, and we are going to do everything in our power to make sure that Nicolas Maduro also knows this. So thank you very much. And now let's talk Cuba, because you already mentioned Cuba very briefly in your speech. And after all the efforts made to integrate Cuba into the region and maybe to bring it closer to the United States, now we find ourselves back in square one, with the difference that for the first time, the president of Cuba, his last name is not Castro. So can you help us understand what is happening in Cuba? Because I remember about 2 years ago, you were to receive an award, a very important award in Cuba, and they didn't allow you to go into the country and receive the award.
Look, the Cuban dictatorship is like the worst kind of dictatorship that you can find in the world, at least in the continent. The dictators that we had in the southern cone, they are petty dictators compared to this one, because somehow they were connected to the feelings and the needs of the people, not in a democratic way, of course, in a very bad way, and with very bad interests, and with very dirty objectives. But to have a dictatorship that is not plugged at all to the feelings and the needs of the people, it is like the worst case. And when this is transplanted to Venezuela, of course, makes the failure even more evident. This regression happened long ago. They sort of had an opening policy during the negotiations to establish diplomatic relations with the United States. But immediately after, let's say, just 1 week after the visit of President Obama to Cuba, where he delivered a formidable speech, that there started the regression, and it was marked by an editorial done by Fidel Castro, going back to the basic principles of this failed and jinetera revolution that you have in Cuba. And they are the biggest parasite country that I have ever seen in the world. No, I mean they lived like 40 years from the Soviet Union, taking advantage of practically everything. Then they suddenly have to live alone for some years, and they almost collapsed. It's called the special period. They just couldn't deal with their so natural inefficiency. And then they found Venezuela, and they started sucking all the blood of Venezuela. And today the Venezuelan world is dead. It's a death body. And they are still sucking. And it's always the most extreme case of parasitism. Usually, parasitism is just applied to sort of alive bodies and other alive organisms. Here is an extreme case where they keep sucking a dead body. And they are part of the problem in Venezuela, of course. They cannot afford these days to live without the Venezuelan oil. It cannot. It will be even worse than the special period. So they can lose, and they know that no matter who will be, what will be the next government of Venezuela. Let's say it's another Chavista government, would not be able to keep that, would not be able to keep delivering this oil to Cuba. Not to mention any democratic government at all. It's not possible at all because in a democratic government you have to think about the solutions for your people. You cannot think, you cannot let that to be extracted from you. And you have to deliver solutions for your people, and you need that oil or the income of that oil in order to give solutions to the people, not to send 22,000 people to repress you or to help to oppress any democratic force in the country. So the Cuban case is an extreme case. In fact, the name of the president is not Castro, but the name of power is still Castro, and the old Fidelist guard. No, we have to talk about Ramiro Valdés, Dorrego, Machado Ventura. These are the biggest problems that Venezuela has, because they are in charge of the repression and have been in charge of the economy of Venezuela and bringing down the economy of Venezuela. And of course, they are waiting for who will outlive who. I mean, if Raúl Castro outlives them, maybe there will be another chance again for an opening of the political system, economy. If these three outlive them, they will be going even back to wars.
It's really sad what is happening in Cuba, what is happening to our brothers and sisters from Cuba.
But it's the saddest thing. Imagine you're very young, but I'm not so young, but nevertheless, if I would have been born in Cuba, I would have lived all my life under the dictatorship. What kind of life is that? How can you do that with your life? I mean, imagine, it's like the worst possible case that can happen to you in anywhere. I mean, when you don't have guarantees, when you don't have basic rights, when they don't care about your needs as a person, when there is no hope for to improve or to make yourself better or make your community better, it is very sad. And everybody know what Cubans can do. You have seen it in this country. They really delivered a lot of wealth and a lot of innovation and a lot of opportunities for themselves and for the country. So it is extremely sad what is happening. That oppression, how can completely put down your human dignity to such an extent.
And it's been that way for over 60 years of a non-democratic regime in Cuba. So I guess they have been suffering enough now, right?
Yes.
So now let's go to Central America and let's talk about Nicaragua, because it's been a year since the protests in Nicaragua, and we want to know what is the OAS doing to help improve the situation there.
Well, from from the very beginning, we have tried to land a political agenda that could bring democratization to the country, that could build stronger institutions in the country, rule of law, independence of the different branches of government. We have to deal also with human rights violations and many problems related to what happened, let's say, since April last year. This has not been a very linear process. I mean, like the opposition that was not well organized had an opportunity, let's say, in the first 2 months of the protests. They were strong enough to, for example, demand anticipated elections, early elections, and to demand some institutional solutions. Then that effect passed, and the government, the regime, prevailed by force on the people, on the demonstrators, and the political dissidents, and that brought a period where the government tried to consolidate and to celebrate that peace that they have achieved by force, with political prisoners, with torture, with what was denounced by the Inter-American Human Rights Commission and the group of independent experts. And then started the sanctions against Nicaragua. We started the procedures of Article 20 of the Inter-American Democratic Charter that may end with the suspension of the country of the Inter-American system. And so immediately after that, some sort of negotiations were open. We were called by both sides to be somehow the guardians of that process. Was not an easy decision, but we felt that it was our duty to be there, and with the Vatican. We just put a condition that was a chronogram in order to free all political prisoners. That condition was accepted by the government. Some of these political prisoners have been freed already in this process that started more than a month ago. But we need more. We need more. We need more of everybody. We need more of the government, because of course there are duties that are on the governmental side. We need the government to free all political prisoners as soon as possible and not as late as possible. We need the government to stop repression on demonstrations in the country. We need the government to start the process to guarantee freedoms, political freedoms in the country. And of course to start the electoral reform that could allow the country to have elections in whenever the political time between government and opposition establish that. We need maturity of both sides. We need people to stop lying to us. We need that. That is very important. We are not playing games. We can't, because the needs of the people are huge, are too big. We need to deliver solutions. So we don't like when people play political games with this situation. We, it, it is not tolerable. It is not acceptable at all. So we concentrate on especially on the duties of the government, because it's the one that has to deliver the solutions today. The solutions about the political prisoners, the solution to recover democracy, the solution to rebuild the institutions, the solutions to have different branches of government operating independently. And with that, of course, then many other things can be resolved.
It seems like in Latin America, we still have so many challenges ahead. And when those Latin American dictators start a process of negotiations, it's basically just to buy time. And we have seen that in Venezuela, for example. They just want to buy time, and that's why
negotiations are political negotiations. If we are not replacing any of the sides of the Nicaraguan case. We are not part of that negotiations. What we know, because it's established in all the instruments of the inter-American systems, is the responsibility that everybody has, and the responsibility, of course, that the government has. It is very clear that they cannot have political prisoners. It is very clear, because of the Inter-American Democratic Charter, how the institutions should work, how an electoral process should be, how branches of government should operate, how probity and the fight of the political system should be. That is what we know, and that's we want to be implemented. The political negotiation is another business. And that are other timings, are other interests, of course, to parts that will struggle when they have an electoral process or whatever. What our concerns is to establish democracy in the country and to establish the rule of law in the country, to establish the protection of human rights in the country. That is our concern, and that is what we want to achieve.
I have noticed.
So a mediation about that, a negotiation about that, it is not acceptable.
They just want to buy time, as I mentioned before, and then the current situation becomes the normal. That's the idea. So I have noticed that media is not covering Haiti that much. It's not covering Haiti very much. And we recently saw that they appointed a new prime minister. So could you tell us what is the state of affairs in Haiti?
Haiti is a country I love so much, and we talked about the structural problems in the Americas, and these structural problems are 10 times worse in Haiti. We never like these structural problems to be politically exploited from within the country or from abroad. The stability of the country, it is something always very difficult to achieve because of the weakness of the political system. And if we see, for example, this new ad interim prime minister is the third one in 2 years. That gives you an idea of how the political development is in the country. We also have structural problems, social structural problems like poverty, inequality, lack of resources, and all that is too much of a burden for any ruler or any a political system so weak like the Haiti. Plus, these days, also the use of violence to resolve political differences is not a new element in Haiti, but is an element that we cannot accept as a tool in order to provide political solutions. We need we want the country to stabilize. We want political mandates, those that were elected, to be respected. We don't want agreements out of the constitution. We want the people of Haiti to be respected and the electoral process to be implemented. The country needs a lot of international cooperation in order to stabilize it, and we should provide it in that sense. We should work it with them in that sense. And let's see. It is supposed that early May there will be the meetings in the Congress and Senate that will confirm the interim government. So we expect that that may happen, and at the same time, of course, we need to keep clear that we can't play with fire when we are all in a barrel of fuel, and we should help always to stabilize Haiti. We should be helpful. We shouldn't exploit their structural problems, and we should be concerned about their needs. We would wish that things in Haiti could be resolved through political dialogue, through the work of institutions, but institutions are weak. The political dialogue is practically inexistent or very difficult to implement. So we always need to encourage these tools. We need to encourage these tools and not to help the society to be polarized. And then to put Haiti also as a good example for something. It's the first country in the Caribbean that started investigation about the corruption of Petrocaribe in Caribbean countries. It's the first one, the only one so far. So a recognition for Haiti, because that is a commitment about fighting against corruption, and something that can completely put a lot of stress on the political system, because imagine how many millions of dollars have been going around Haiti in the past years. So my recognition for them about that, but for sure that didn't make them foreign actors to play a game there too. For sure, some political foreign actors are playing a political game against the government that is trying that, for sure.
It's very sad that after almost 200 years as a republic, Haiti is still the poorest country in the hemisphere.
It's the best revolutionary process ever in the world. I mean,
that's very true.
The very best. I mean, if you see that phrase that Thomas Jefferson, all men are created equal, was not so valid for this country, but it was valid in Haiti. In Haiti, that revolution put everybody equal. And that was the first revolution I know in the world that made all men, women really created equal. And that is a completely different approach. All our independence in Latin America too, they had a slavery going on and things, and the conditions of oppression have been kept ever since in many ways.
I couldn't agree more on that. And my last question before getting to the questions from the audience is, given the fact that Latin America is still the region in the world that it's probably the most unequal region. So what is the OAS doing to help close this gap? And I'm thinking of indigenous populations, I'm thinking of the LGBTQ groups. So what is the OAS doing in terms of solving this situation?
What we are doing is trying that this phrase that was I put on during my campaign to become Secretary General, and then I put it as a motto for the organization: more rights for more people is not just empty words, that we can really make a difference about bringing access to rights for everybody. I think that is the easiest way to close these inequality gaps, and we'll keep working in that sense. We have improved a lot about the instrument that we have in order to protect indigenous people or Afro-descendants or LGBTIQ people. Still a lot to do. As I said, it would be too ambitious to resolve 200 years of structural problems in 5 years of the organization, with the organization. But we are trying very hard to bring these rights closer to the people, and to be a voice for those that do not have a voice, and to denounce those who are suffering human rights violation. As you have seen, that our voice has been strong, and it's even getting stronger by day.
Thank you very much for the wonderful remarks. Now we are going to get some questions from the audience. And I think there is a gentleman in the middle here. And we have time for these questions, so don't worry about it. And first, before asking the question, please state your name and the organization you work for. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Alexander Kravitz from Insight. I want to congratulate you as a moderator for bringing another high-profile speaker to NYU. And Secretario, it's always great to listen to it's refreshing to listen to such frank talk from an international funcionario. I want to pick up on the topic of corruption. I liked what you said about moving from the certainty of impunity to the possibility of justice. And I want to bring you to El Salvador. The president-elect Nayib Bukele has made anti-corruption one of the main themes of his electoral platform. And within that platform, he has talked about the creation of a CCS modeled after the Guatemala, the CICIG in Guatemala. And he met with you before the campaign, and it has been reported that has been one of the topics of conversation. So the question is, if you could share with us, where are those conversations? How do you see, at this point, how do you see that happening after he takes power on 1st of June? And what do you see as the obstacles, or maybe if you could just sort of walk us through what needs to happen for a CICIG to become, for CCS to become a reality, and what might be a timeline? And then second, have you been invited, and if so, will you be attending the inauguration on June 1st? Thank you very much.
First, I want to make something very very clear. I don't attend inaugurations. I have never attended one since I am Secretary General, and I will not attend one, because I mean, if you have to go to all of them, or you cannot be selective about it. And it is not the easiest way, but the role of that I have seen of the Secretary General could be in an inauguration is not a relevant role compared to the work that you have to do when in office. I am very pleased that this inauguration is on my birthday, but so I will have to wait till my birthday to know about the proposals that the elected president has done. Usually, for us, it is very complicated to work with transitional governments or elected governments. We have a government and we respect that to the very end. So we wait for the moment that Nayib Bukele's government and will start working all cooperation issues that and to know exactly what he needs and what he wants about fighting corruption in El Salvador. And we are ready to help and to assist. This was mentioned in some of the visits he paid here before, and we are ready to cooperate. But of course, we need the government to start before.
Thank you very much. I think there is another one here.
Hi, Michael Lavers from the Washington Blade. Thank you so much for being here today. You touched a little bit upon LGBTI issues in the Americas, and I wanted to follow up with you on that a little bit. As you know, there's been growing concern about the impact that Brazilian President Jair Bolsonaro's election and presidency has had on LGBTI issues in Brazil, and then there's also been some concern and questions about the implementation of last January's Inter-American Court of Human Rights ruling on same-sex marriage and transgender rights. So can you tell me how the OAS is addressing these concerns, and then also conversely how the OAS is working with activists across the region to further expand LGBTI rights?
Yes. The organization has been working since long ago about LGBTIQ rights, and we want that to go on as strong as possible, and we are fully committed to their full access to all possible civil, political, cultural, social, economic rights for LGBTIQ communities. We have to deal with in the organization, as you somehow we talked about that during the presentation and during these questions. We deal with first with crisis, then with structural problems, and then we may deal with some ideological or concerns or speech or hate speech concerns. But we have to deal with the institutional issues and what the institutions are doing about. And in that sense, of course, we want all institutions in the continent to keep responding and not to lower any standards about human rights of LGBTIQ communities. So we need to keep that in mind. No matter what the speech says, we have to deal with the institutional cases and the institutional responses for that. And we expect definitely that the violence in the whole continent against LGBTIQ people, the discrimination that they suffer is resolved. We want every country to resolve this discrimination. This discrimination that the LGBTI people suffer. We want every country to investigate and to resolve any murder of LGBTI people of any community. We want every country to provide solutions for how the basic principles of human rights can be made operative in order to resolve these issues. We have tools. We allow them to work full extent. We allow them to denounce, and we ourselves add to that denounces. And also to provide the gestures. I participated in the gay parade in Vancouver last year, and I will participate in the Washington gay parade this year. I think gestures are a relevant matter too, and you also have to be strong in defending these issues and these rights.
I think that, before another question, I think that the OAS has been doing its homework, because after you took office, I think you created a department for social inclusion working with these groups?
And and even the bathrooms, and we fix practically everything that was needed to fix about these groups within the organization, and this is what we promote for out of the organization.
I'm glad to hear that. So we have another question from the middle up there, and then we are coming back here. Okay, we are trying just to go from my side to the other. That's democracy.
Hello, thank you for having this. Rafael Bernal from the Hill newspaper. As interstate
See you better.
as interstate tensions are rising between Mexico and the United States, and I think this morning, I don't know if you missed it, but there was a little Twitter exchange, para variar. As those tensions continue to rise among two of the largest and one of the largest countries in the hemisphere, how much is it a risk that will occupy the OAS and sort of take away space to deal with other threats around the region?
So far, not the United States nor Mexico have brought any case about their bilateral issues to the Organization of American States. So it's something that we don't deal with cases when we are not invited unless there are institutional issues like migration that we have made. We have a resolution about for example, the case of the children separated of their parents and of the whole migration situation. But those cases that just affect interest of both countries, we can't participate unless we are especially invited. So that part is not taking the time of the organization practically at all.
Thank you.
Carla Angola, de IBTV Miami. You were talking about the options that Venezuela still have, and you mentioned responsibility to protect and intervention, if I heard correct. Humanitarian
I
intervention.
mentioned two tools of international public law.
Yeah, of course. And I want to hear more about your remarks on that. How can we put into action, or how can we apply that strategies? And what do you think about a suggestion from Senator Rick Scott? He said that without a regional coalition of military support, it will be impossible for the humanitarian aid to reach the country. I would like to hear your remarks on this.
Yes. About the responsibility to protect or about humanitarian intervention, you know that there are procedures about that. They are tools, instruments of international law that they have their way to be implemented. And of course that cannot be ignored by anybody. I think somehow we mentioned these possibilities, and we have kept studying the Venezuelan case. But apart from us, I think we have a serious boost from Human Rights Watch when they presented their last report about the humanitarian situation in Venezuela, and saying that the Secretary General of the United Nations should open all available tools of United Nations in order to resolve the Venezuelan crisis. And of course, that needs much more elaboration, and we need to address the case based on facts, and how these facts are creating the conditions for applying these tools. The thing is that it is very difficult that a narco government with it is we only have one case in the history of the continent of a whole state completely kidnapped by organized crime and drug trafficking, and it was the case of of Noriega in Panama. The thing is that when you see how the dictatorships were resolved in that sub-region of the continent in the 20th century, those tools, those ways of resolving the dictatorships cannot be transferred to the 21st century because they have become completely against the law and against the way that the international political system work. I mean, for example, there was a way like a revolution, the one that put down, for example, Fulgencio Batista or Somoza. There was the case of coup d'etat against the dictatorship, like was the case of Pérez Jiménez in Venezuela. It was the case of military intervention, like Noriega in Panama. Some people took it to extreme, like it's completely unacceptable of murdering the dictator, like was the case of Trujillo in Dominican Republic. None of these tools can be transferred to the 21st century. Not one of those tools is acceptable in the 21st century. But to deny to the Venezuelan people tools of international law, like responsibility to protect and humanitarian intervention, first is completely unethical. It's not acceptable to deny to a people those possibilities. And second is against the law. Why you should discriminate and not applying international law to some, and applying in some cases and not in other cases. But of course, this has to be according to the procedure and implemented in the right way.
Thank you very much for the great question. Who's next? Okay, here.
Thank you. Beatriz Pascual, de la Agencia EFE. Secretary, I have two questions about Nicaragua. The first one is that the Alianza Cívica has been asking for early elections, and the OEA has been working a lot with the Ortega government in this aspect. So do you think that President Ortega will be willing to have early elections? And my second question is about something that you mentioned during your speech. You said that maturity is needed by both sides and that people need to stop playing games. So I was wondering what has happened here, if the Alianza Cívica has done something that was not adequate, if you were referring to the government. Thank you.
If Ortega is willing to call early elections, once I talked to him, it was about May last year, and he was willing to have early elections, where those first 2 months of the demonstrations, many things have changed, and I don't think he's so willing these days, but I cannot interpret that, or I cannot prejudge anybody about this. I think it's a need for Nicaragua. No, it's the easiest way to re-democratize the country and to bring institutional solutions to the country. So we have to keep working in that way. Really, I think elections is like a solution that is the most peaceful solution of them all. To have clear, free elections with international observation, that is extremely needed today in Nicaragua. Clearly, we expect that could be both understood by everybody. I don't think also that too early elections will be good for anyone, because I think that we may have the results that will not allow the people to be prepared, not the opposition, not the political parties, to get completely ready about that. And about playing games is like in many ways, it has happened all the time and by all political actors in the Nicaraguan system. And I tell you just one example. One party of the negotiations asked us to call for a meeting, and then they didn't present themselves in that meeting. So you ask us to make the meeting, and then you don't come to the meeting. I mean, that is the kind of political game that cannot be played.
Thank you very much, Beatriz, for the thoughtful question. So I think we have another one in the middle. Thank you. Please state your name and the organization you work for.
Hello, my name is Artur Svaros. I work with the Latvian Embassy. We are observers at the OAS. I have a quick question about, as an EU member state, and maybe other EU member states would be glad to hear your take on the EU role that has been in the context of the urgent issues in the Latin American region that you covered. So maybe your general take on the EU role, and what do you suggest, or all that? Yeah, thank you.
I think European Union and, not I think, it's a fact, European Union and the Organization of American States, we really share the same principles and values. Democracy and human rights are definitely fundamental for both the European Union and for the Organization of American States. I think the European Union played a crucial role in implementing sanctions against the Maduro regime, and they have been completely right in calling for free and fair elections in the country, in not recognizing the re-election of Nicolás Maduro. In many ways, we have shared those views, and we have supported them, and we have supported each other about it. Also, there are concerns of other Latin American cases, but in this case also we want to recognize that practically all countries of the European Union have recognized the transitional government of President Guaidó, except 4 countries of the 27. So that is, we want to express our high appreciation for that. Also, there are your concerns about what is going on in the agenda of the continent, in the thematic agenda of the continent, human rights, immigration, how democracy work. Your approach also to your support to the work of the organization in Nicaragua. So we are like a strong partners. It doesn't mean that we have to be to agree about everything all the time. No, but we go in the same direction, and that is the good thing.
Thank you very much, Secretary General. We have another question down here, then we will be going up there. Okay, please.
Good morning, I'm Luis Alonso with the IP. Thank you for the opportunity. Secretary, good morning.
Good morning.
I wanted to ask a follow-up on the responsibility to protect. How viable can that be given the veto power of Russia and China in the Security Council? I understand that decision needs to come from the Security Council. Yeah. And then I would like to ask you about the need for more sanctions. You say we need more, not less. What is the sanction that we need that we haven't seen yet? Because the U.S. already has applied, every 2 weeks they come up with a new sanction.
Yes.
They haven't done it right. Is the strategy not being applied correctly? Thank you very much.
Thank you. I think a responsibility to protect is so viable that how I see it is that it is already being applied, because responsibility to protect means a lot of diplomatic tools before. You just go to the end, but the first measure cannot be the last. I mean, what you take as a last resource, it doesn't have to be what you do at the very first step. So there are diplomatic tools like diplomatic missions, like political dialogue, like sanctions, like all diplomatic tools that have been applied in the Venezuelan, or are being applied in the Venezuelan case. So the last resource, of course, is the use of force. Is when all that has failed, and that is, we have to see this as a process, and this process, of course, have to take us. I always expect that the process take us not to the very last step, and to be the last resource to be needed to implement. But of course, the way that the Venezuelan regime of Maduro is responding, it is not in a very cooperative way, and it's making the things worse all the time. So, I mean, we have to keep all these options open, but we have to do it along a process, and we expect that we don't have to reach the last, the use of the last resource, but if needed, of course, we have to do it according to the procedures, and try to overcome the political positions that, for example, those countries have had so far.
Thank you very much. I think we have...
And the sanctions. Sanctions, yes. I think, for example, I mentioned Panama, and that is the only Latin American country that has applied sanctions. We need all Latin American countries, all those of the Lima Group, that have approved in May last year a very strong package of sanctions to implement them. And of course, still here the sanctions have been very precise, and have really affected the worst of the criminal activities of the Venezuelan dictatorship. But some of the illegal money of Venezuela have hardly been touched. No, I mean, I know the story. For example, a guy that is even living here, that the sanctions affected him in something like $35 million, and that was practically nothing for him. He was cooler than a cucumber. So it's a lot, much more can be done about that.
So we have time for 2 more questions. We know Secretary General is a very busy person, and we appreciate him being here. Thank you very much for that. So that's a hard choice. Okay, let's go all the way up there and then come back here. Okay.
Good morning, Secretary. This is Al Lopez from Manchester Trade. Thinking about Mexican position about the issues in Venezuela, President López Obrador has said in many times that he will not recognize to Guaido as the president of Venezuela. And even a few weeks ago, the Secretary of International Affairs, Marcelo Ebrard, has said Mexico will not invite to President Trump to go Mexico. And thinking about these things, what do you think about the Mexican position with the Venezuela issues? And do you think it will be possible to Mexico will join to the countries like US and Brazil to support Guaido? Or have you talked about these issues in Venezuela with the government of Mexico?
Look, your question is far out of my reach. No, I mean, I don't discuss and I don't argue about the positions of any country, and I don't force any country to have any position. I mean, I want the countries to be consistent with the inter-American system and how democracy works and how the rule of law should be, the democratic rule of law should be, and how should be the respect of human rights, and how our international commitments in order to achieve that. And I always wanted the countries to be as coherent as possible to these principles. But I cannot discuss what I vote or what I don't vote, because that is their own decision, and I just have to respect it. That's why votations in this world exist, so you have different points of view, and I don't have to share that. What my responsibility is that I need to act according to the resolutions that have been approved by the Inter-American system. So if I have a resolution that have been approved that recognizes Gustavo Tarre as the permanent representative of Venezuela to the Permanent Council, I have to respect that. If there is a resolution that declares illegitimate the government of Maduro, I have to respect that. And if I have a resolution that declares that there is an alteration of the constitutional order in Venezuela, I have to respect that and act in consequence to that. So I always expect every country to be as close as possible to that, to these commitments that come from from the Inter-American system. But what position they take and how they vote, that is completely free, and I don't have I shouldn't express any opinion about that.
Thank you, Secretary General. We have our last question down here. Please, go ahead.
Good morning. Thank you for having the opportunity of talking to you. This is Alina Dieste from AFP. You said that Cuba has been under a dictatorship for 6 decades. Could that happen to Venezuela? And if you think there could be an end for Maduro's regime, why? Why do you think that could be possible?
Of course, I always, the Inter-American system has the tools, the mechanism in order to provide solutions for the cases of interruption of a democratic system, of an alteration of the constitutional order anywhere in the continent. And our, what I said is that our job is to make that work and to reestablish democracy for every country in the continent. And we should do whatever is necessary in order to achieve that. When you, on top of that, you have ingredients like a humanitarian crisis, like a migratory crisis, when you have systematic human rights violations, then the case becomes more urgent, and the need to provide and to deliver solutions, it is more urgent for all the countries. I think we are all countries in the continent are doing what is possible, and so it shouldn't surprise us that all these resolutions that I mentioned have been approved. We would expect, of course, we would want, of course, that Maduro would do something decent, like giving power away, like establishing the conditions for the transitional government to operate and to bring the solutions that the country needs, to start to implement solutions for the humanitarian crisis that the country is suffering, for the suffering of all the Venezuelans that are abroad, to help the diaspora come back. All that you need guarantees, you need the full protection of human rights. But as I said, we shouldn't leave any possible tool close to resolve this case. And if this case goes along, and at a certain moment, the international community reaches the conclusion that, of course, responsibility to protect or humanitarian intervention is the only possible ways to resolve the crisis in Venezuela, okay, that to be open and to be possible to act in that way. But as you see it, I don't see it as an easy process. We see there how the regime operates and how their responses are, and are more linked to criminal actions than to political actions, which is very difficult to talk politically to this Venezuelan regime. Their actions are always more criminal reactions than anything else. I mean, the way that they distribute the territory, the way that they push people away of the territory, the way that they have done the social clean of the country is all are through criminal actions, like putting, as I mentioned, putting a revolver or a gun in the head of normal people that say a couple of things loud in a neighborhood. So that is this kind of micromanagement of repression also has to be resolved, and it will be hard. I think yesterday was presented the national plan to rebuild Venezuela, and many people have thought about the day after, and I think there will be many days before the day after, and many days after, many days during, and many days after. No, it is not a simple process. We are in a much better position than we were, let's say, 4 years ago when we started, but I wish that all the actions would have been taken then. And when we were talking then, I mean, it was sort of hard to be understood. Now, I mean, the Venezuelan regime has done whatever is possible to give us the reason. And Maduro is always acting in a way that makes us more right.
Thank you, everyone. We really thank you for the wonderful questions, and we appreciate Secretary General being here and taking the time to speak with the NYU DC community. Thank you very much for that. And now let's give Secretary General a round of applause for being here.